a member of the governance committee?
Yes, about a year ago, I started to decide I'd get more active locally because of what I saw in the politics. I thought I could really help. I wanted to participate in my local government. And so I started writing a few things, and I got some notice, and people in the governance committee and others got to know me. And and I went to some governance committee meetings, and I joined the governance committee a month or so, or around the time of the annual meeting last year when it was on the warrant.
Okay, so you've been on for about 1 year then?
Yes, a little less than a year.
Okay.
When I started to run for selectman, I resigned from the governance committee so that there wouldn't be any conflicts or any. So I'm not on the governance committee right now, but I was until a few weeks ago when I became a candidate for selectman.
All right.
And the big focus of the governance committee has been to work on the Acting Town Manager Act in the past, as well as looking at structure
Yes.
to recommend how departments, or to tell us a little bit more about what
It's been, being on the governance committee is one of the best things I ever did. The people on it, some of the best active citizens. It's one of the best committees you'd ever want to belong to. Very bright, concerned citizens. The work is very substantial and very important to the town. What they did, and I won't go through the whole genesis of the governance committee, but the main focus in the last year or so is creating the amended Town Manager Act, which had a couple of presentations and annual meetings and so forth. And finally, we presented it in its entirety at the last annual meeting. I spoke at the annual meeting in support of it and so forth. And that's a very significant and important act, I think, for the town. And the town passed it by, I think, over 150 or 60 votes or so, a good amount. And then it went through the legislative process. Now that was quite an adventure and quite an interesting activity that a lot of people I don't think knew about or know about. Once the act was passed at town, I think a lot of people thought that it would immediately become effective. Even people on the governance committee did, and in town government. Well, lo and behold, it has to go through a fairly elaborate process in the legislature. It's a fairly long story, but it goes to the House and has to be passed 3 times there, and then it has to go to the Senate, be passed 3 times there. It has to be scrutinized by the attorney, the Senate counsel, and the House counsel, and so forth. So that process generally takes about a year. And one of the really good things that we did is there was a lot of concern at the time with the amended Town Manager Act of when it was going to be get through, because they wanted to get it implemented. There's a lot of good features in town governance, which we can get into regarding the budget and so forth. But we had some meetings with some government officials and so forth, and they said, well, it's going to take about a year to get this through, which is usually what legislation does. So then we parlayed again, and this is where we sort of went into action and decided this is not going to be satisfactory. We don't want to wait a whole year on this. And we got back with the legislators, and we looked into it, and come to find out, we thought by applying more interest and getting more people knowledgeable that we really wanted it passed at Beacon Hill and so forth, that it would. And so we got into that activity. We went in and we testified in the legislature. Most of the governance committee did, and some townspeople. And lo and behold, it started to move quicker. And it passed through the committee, which is a key place for a bill to pass. Went on to the House, and to make a long story short, it ended up being passed by both the Senate, the House and the Senate, and put into law in it was December, early January of this year. What's really good about that is just a couple of things. We didn't lay back and wait for it to go for a whole year. If we had, and that's one of my reasons for wanting to be active in government. I like to see things move along fast, because when they stall, people can get into disputes and worries, and it's just not good for government. That was a very controversial piece of legislation. If it hadn't passed by then, we'd still be disputing it now, I think, in town.
Because you mentioned there was some testimony that, and there were people for and against that testified,
Yes.
as I remember that. Yeah. And I think a lot of folks who were against it felt that it was primarily drafted so that Mike Milanowski, the then acting town manager, would be able to become a permanent town manager. I think that's what people's views were.
Right.
During that process of putting this together, was there discussion among the governance committee about making sure that the provisions were such that Mike would be able to be made permanent manager?
Not really. It did not come up that much in discussion at all. The governance committee and the amended Town Manager Act, which is a very important document for this town, is long range. It's the nuts and bolts on how the relationship between the town manager and the selectmen and the committees is put together. It's a very long-range, serious project, so it wasn't part of the discussion at all whether or not Mike Milanowski or anybody would be the town manager.
So you never heard any talk about, well, let's make sure we change it so that Mike can stay on? No one ever brought that up?
Absolutely not. Oh, not on the governance committee at all. No, no, I'd forgotten that was possible. That was in the air. Yeah, I'm glad you asked that. Absolutely not. The amended Town Manager Act is chock full of improvements to help the government run better. It's much bigger than Mike Milanowski or any town manager. It's what's really good for the town in the long range. However, we did want to get it passed fairly quickly. Some people, I think, who saw us wanting to get it passed quickly and not wait the whole year, I think maybe thought that was what our haste was. Haste was there was a political environment, as you know, in town that's not always, it can be a little disruptive, to say the least. And we wanted to pull it out of that, get it through, and so that the provisions in the town could be implemented, the town would benefit from it, and we could move on quickly. It would be very unhealthy for this town if we had laid back passively and accepted the fact that the town manager would take a long time to pass it. We'd be going into town meeting now with that dispute. That'd be very unhealthy for the town. So that was one of the really good things that we did. I'm very proud of the fact that, and we took the initiative. We made government work.